Welcome to the Mixing Babies and Business podcast. I'm your host, Amy Lynch. I'm covering all things parenthood, business, flexible, and remote work with kids. Think of it as your virtual village where you can tune into stories from other business and community leaders who also happen to be parents, negotiating for their needs, taking up space, and navigating the future of work. Season 6 is sponsored by the Mixing Babies and Business Changemaker program. Sign up to learn more at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/changemaker. This is a bonus solo episode from me, Amy, founder and podcast host at Mixing Babies and Business. I'm a mom of 3 kids, ages 2.5, 6, and 8 years old. I'm a writer, artist, speaker, and since becoming a parent in 2016, I'm an accidental turned intentional activist. What started as me bringing my baby into workshops, conferences, and boardrooms has evolved into guest speaking on inclusion for parents, producing my own parent-friendly professional development events, resources, and content, and being invited to have a seat at the table with government and industry leaders to represent other parents across Canada. In this episode, I want to share more about why I became an activist and how you can too. Let's get into it. Hi there, and thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. Before I get into my accidental turned intentional activism journey, if you enjoy tuning into this virtual village for parents interested in all things entrepreneurship, flexible, and remote work with kids, could you please like, subscribe, or follow the pod on your platform of choice? And if it enables you to do so, could you please leave a review? It helps other parents around the world find the podcast. I read all of your feedback, and I would love to share some of it in future episodes and on the website at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com. Okay, thank you for your support. It is partly the reason I've kept doing what I'm doing. So as you know, I'm Amy and I'm a mom of 3 boys. But when I first started this podcast in 2020, I had only 2 kids, ages 2 and 4. Now I have 2 in elementary school and 1 just began preschool this September, which is hard to believe. I may no longer be baby wearing on stages, but every time I get a breakfast or after 4 p.m. event invitation, I consider whether my toddler will be able to attend with me and possibly the older 2 as well. Because if you're a parent listening, as you know, most before school and after school events are a big no-go area. It's too hard, too many logistics, too much discomfort. It could be a mixture of hangry, overstimulated kids having their after-school transition, which can often include a meltdown, let's be honest. Or if it's early hours, that means I need to get ready, get my kids ready, pack snacks, extra diapers for the little one, and as he no longer loves the stroller, I'll most likely be carrying him sideways as he goes between wanting to run around and be held many times. It's just the way it is, for now. But I have attended these things in the past, when all 3 kids were babies before they could run around. Even after they were toddlers, I still attended them and just let them run around me when I was on stage. Let's look back at 2016 Amy. Maybe she was delusional or trying to prove a point. Either way, I know that the version of me 8 years ago has the same values that I hold true today. I've always said over and over again in many pitches, presentations, conversations, interviews, and written correspondence, I believe everyone deserves to design a life that works for them and their family. And I also believe that you should be able to invest in yourself while spending time with your loved ones. If you're tuning into this episode today, I'm going to guess that you feel that way too. Maybe not with as much conviction as me, but even if it's a small inkling of a knowing or a whisper of this belief, it's something we share no matter where in the world you live, what family dynamics you have, and what work you do. Because what I've found over the past 8 years as I meet, connect with, and interview other parents around the world, many of us have common experiences. We chose to become parents and are trying to work on ourselves personally and professionally while we raise these little humans. We have a growth mindset, are open to change, new possibilities, experiences, ways of being, living, and working in the world. We may be living somewhere different to where we grew up or have at some point lived in a different location to our family of origin. This means we've had to recreate our own version of a village wherever we've lived and source new support systems, build networks, and find a community to fit into. And if we haven't found this community in our immediate geographic region, we are going online to find and connect with others. It's how you found me in this podcast, most likely. We are convinced traditional corporate cultures, work hours, and structures are not designed to support parents or set them up for success. We are trying to break generational cycles of scarcity, violence, habits, and behaviors we don't want to pass on to our children. Perhaps only some of those resonate with you, but they are common themes I've discussed over the past 4 years across almost 100 episodes of the podcast, as well as with guest speakers at my events, with parents I meet in real life and online. line. We have these crossovers in many areas. And what I have to say to you, if you hear yourself in any of those descriptions, is I've been there and I'm still here, 3 kids and 8 years into becoming a parent, right alongside you. While I've been living out, embracing, and embodying many of those themes, beliefs, and values in my own personal experience, I have found if you're a parent of young kids struggling with accessing and implementing traditional business advice, resources, and programming, showing up with your kids in business settings and advocating for your needs is an unconventional but highly effective way to invest in yourself while spending time with your loved ones and creating a social impact for others. This episode is going to be all about how I've increased my tolerance for awkward conversations, situations, and learned how to better advocate for my needs by entering business spaces with my kids, showing up, taking up space, sharing my voice and my opinions in spoken and written form, creating space for others and their kids, and advocating for others. As I said, I'm a parent, an artist, a writer. I have a multi-hyphenate career. I do marketing, communications, consulting, and over the past 8 years, I've also been a part-time activist and changemaker. But it's amazing what can happen once things get going. In the past 18 months alone, I've been invited to a private dinner for women entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and stakeholders in March 2023. It was a nonpartisan event, but it turned into 3 separate invitations for me to attend meetings with members of the Conservative, NDP, and Liberal parties in Canada, who are also members of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. The next month, I ended up visiting the chair of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, Karen Vecchio, at Parliament Hill in the House of Commons for a 30-minute one-on-one meeting where we spoke about gender equality, workforce participation, women quitting their businesses during the pandemic, creating accessible and inclusive spaces for parents, and the connections to childcare, domestic violence, and economic independence across policy areas and studies. We also talked about our kids, of course. I've been invited to Startup Gov events with federal and provincial politicians, and I think it's been around half a dozen or so between the online and in-person events through Startup Canada's network. This past month, I was invited to the U.S. Ambassador's residence in Ottawa for a startup pitch competition. I sadly got sick and couldn't attend, but I still was excited to receive that invitation. The annual Canada Women's Entrepreneurship Award as a nominee in the social change category, with the event hosted by RBC as part of Women of Influence, which is taking place later this year in Toronto. I'm not in the finalists for my category, but I'm still going to go and celebrate, this time without my kids. Canada's Minister for Small Business, the Honourable Rechi Valdez, began following my LinkedIn company page over the past month, and this is not to brag, but to get you thinking of the things which can change over time without a lot of budget, but merely through your words, your actions, your opinions, your ideas, and a bit of follow-through. Because if our needs are not being considered for the events, opportunities, and experiences that you want to gain access to, you know I'm going to encourage you to have the audacity to invite yourself, shake things up, and create some change. So together we can do something about it for ourselves and for others. If you haven't already indicated your interest in learning more about how I've created parent-friendly professional development opportunities and impact, and how you can too, you can learn more at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/changemaker. Now let's go back in time for a while and see where this all started and why it's still relevant today. I've worked in contract, flexible, and remote roles spanning the business, tech, education, arts, and creative industries as both an employee and a freelance contractor in Canada, Australia, Ireland, and England over the past 2 decades. As some of you might know, I'm a mom to 3 kids. They're all Irish Canadian dual citizens, and I started working remotely before becoming a mom in 2014 to have more location freedom because I knew we'd be having an international family. When I had our first baby in England, I was still working remotely and decided to bring him along with me to a startup program I enrolled in and other networking events I attended. It's what I did on repeat. Not because people asked me to, not because anyone told me I should, simply because I lived far from family. My husband and I are from 2 different countries, and we had our first baby in another different country to where we grew up. I was used to doing my own thing. I was exclusively breastfeeding. We didn't have childcare, nor did we want to find it, as our baby was a newborn. We were living in a very busy city. I was comfortable at events, and as I had worked in PR and marketing over the years in different countries, I was fine to go into these things by myself, but now I had a little buddy somebody to bring along with me. So I did. And because of my background, I was blogging about where we were living, places we traveled to, experiences I was having. And when I became a parent, this just became a new topic for me to explore. So I took photos, wrote about our adventures, asked questions aloud about why things were built or done a certain way, and continued doing this when we relocated to Canada in 2017. I started sharing these blog posts and my experiences on social media, mainly LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, but people started responding. At the time in 2016, when I first had our son, I was pursuing a business idea around creating more accessible financial literacy content for women, specifically millennials like me. But with parenthood, trying to get access to business workshops, grant information, programming, mentorship, it felt like another barrier and hurdle to get over before I could even show up and participate in these sessions. And to be frank, I wasn't having any of it. If I make the effort to get out of the house by 7 a.m. with my baby, diaper bag, supplies, food, stroller, and try to get to your workshop on time and you decide to lock me out, you know I'm going to take some pictures and I'm going to write about it. Thankfully, this only happened to me once, and unfortunately, it was at a Women in Business breakfast of all places. But one of my lovely younger sisters was with me, so she offered to go for a walk around the block with my toddler so that I could go in for a bit. As I say these words out loud, I'm fuming. But I was also pregnant at that time with our second baby. It was early days. I was dressed in my corporate biz lady outfit, made the effort to get my toddler and I there before 9 a.m., where my sister was meeting us, and quite literally, I was greeted at the door with shock, surprise, and it wasn't an outright, "You can't sit with us," but the first woman I met said it all with her facial expression. So what did I do? I decided not to cause a scene and participate for 30 minutes, then I left. Every other event and occasion, I was causing a scene by just showing up. And I don't mean a loud, banging, boisterous scene. There was no squeaky toys and rattles flying everywhere. But have you ever tried to maneuver a stroller quietly, swiveling into a park position beside your workshop table with a baby inside? It's hard to camouflage, and you shouldn't be worried about doing that. I was never outright loud, my kids didn't cry or shriek, and if they had, I wouldn't have been surprised because they were babies and toddlers. It's not my fault if you're an attendee at a business event and you've never seen a tiny human before, or a woman with a tiny human trying to run a business. But I was not about to apologize for simply showing up. And if you want to ask me to leave in front of a room full of people, go ahead, be my guest, let's see what happens. Thankfully, on 90% of occasions, I was treated humanely, kindly, spoken to, and acknowledged. But the other 10%, people pretended I was invisible, ignored me, they stared but didn't approach or speak to me. They talked about how loud and annoying it is when you're seated near kids on airplanes. Not sure why that one came out. And in that one instance, I just wasn't welcomed in with my toddler by that first breakfast guest greeter. So let's send some love back to that 2018 version of Amy, who was pregnant with her second kid and just trying to get some networking done alongside her toddler. And let's just also thank any siblings and friends that help us in those times of need. That Amy had been doing this parenting thing for 2 years by then and was pregnant with her second baby. She knew what to do with her solid track record of entering business spaces and events with her first kid in 2 different countries. And who would know that a random occurrence like that would happen and catch her off guard? But thankfully, that didn't slow me down. Only a pregnancy and postpartum period can do that to me, pretty much. I kept on networking, doing market research, speaking to other parents, and then I launched a landing page for my first newsletter a month before my second kid was born. And then I applied to an Impact Academy run by Impact Hub and sponsored by the City of Ottawa, which I started towards the end of the 4th trimester when that second baby was 10 weeks old. I would be building parent-friendly professional development out loud and in real time. This 3-month academy was a program that I brought my baby to for every workshop, presentation, and event. By the end of 2018, I had plans to launch my first pop-up events in an entrepreneur incubator space and had my sights set on some other problems I had encountered during these adventures. The first one being that almost all business spaces I entered around the city in 2017 and 2018, including the Impact Hub co-working space where the academy was hosted, Bayview Yards where some of our workshops were held, the Telfer School of Management building at the University of Ottawa did not have baby change facilities. Aside from one at the new college space that I hosted my first pop-up events at, these spaces spaces were promoted as innovation hubs where new ideas are fostered and connections are made. But oh wait, that baby you brought, you can change them on a restroom floor, on a couch, or a boardroom table in a common area, in your stroller or the back of your car if you have one, or maybe on your lap if you can balance that. At one event I attended, it was suggested I walk 20 minutes to the nearest facilities at the university where there are change tables and a room for feeding your baby. Do you realize in Ottawa it can get to between minus 20 and minus 30 degrees Celsius in winter and above 30 degrees Celsius in summer? If you've ever had an emergency to change and clean up after with your baby, you will know that a 20-minute walk can feel impossible. You would most likely choose the stroller, your lap, a couch, a table, or the floor with your jacket or change mat down if you had to do it immediately. But after asking many questions, writing about it in my newsletter, posting about it on social media, speaking to my business advisors at Invest Ottawa, the home of Bayview Yards, I'm proud of the small part my family and I have played in creating positive progress in this area. Baby change facilities were installed in an all-gender washroom on the ground floor at Invest Ottawa while my second kid was still a baby. Then in 2019, they approached me to ask if I'd like to host my parent-friendly business meetup events at their location and offered to sponsor the room costs and catering. As we know, the events were paused in March 2020, but right before that happened, I was able to host my first pop-up event in that space, and they installed an additional baby change table in the second floor washrooms around the corner from where my events would be held. I celebrated these outcomes, but also after entering so many libraries, community centers, and department stores over the years set up to accommodate parents and their families with more inclusive design, it reminded me of just how far we have to go for our basic needs to be met in business situations and spaces. If you'd like to advocate for similar changes to facilities in your area, I've written a draft letter that you can download from my website and customize for your request at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/change. In between all of the activism and event planning, I spoke with the leader of Creative Mornings Ottawa chapter at the time and offered to speak on the topic of creating more inclusive spaces and experiences for parents at a future event. They said they'd keep me in mind, and off I went on my merry way, completing the Impact Academy, designing mini guides for parents navigating the corporate jungle with kids, and for corporates wanting to create more parent-friendly business spaces and experiences. I made them available on social media, my newsletter, my blog, and kept chugging along. I didn't even have a website for what I was creating. I kept all of my content on my travel blog, my personal social media, and only had a small free newsletter. Then in the spring of 2019, it was like things started to gain momentum. I was asked to speak at the April Creative Mornings Ottawa event as a guest speaker on the topic of inclusion alongside 4 other speakers and to sit on a panel. My husband would be away traveling for work that week, but I said yes, asked the grandparents to help us get ready that morning, and I arrived at the venue at 8 a.m. with my toddler and my 10-month-old in our double stroller to deliver the 5-minute lightning talk and sit on the panel between feeding sessions for the baby. The event went really well and the kids did great. I didn't forget my lines. I did have to move around a lot on stage, starting the talk with the baby in the carrier and ending it with him on my hip, but I had wonderful feedback and the photos from this experience are still ones that I use to this day, 5 years later. The event was right before I was hosting my first pop-up event at Algonquin College's Startup Incubator space, and it was amazing to be able to promote it to over 200 people at the Ottawa Art Gallery that morning. I hosted my first meetup with over a dozen parents in May, featuring 3 panel guests who graciously accepted my invitation and I'm still in touch with to this day. The next month in June, Impact Hub asked me to speak about my work for the launch of the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub in Eastern Ontario. They also asked for my help to design a pop-up childcare offering for event attendees, which I gladly accepted as a challenge and helped them to create. This was an evening launch, around 6 to 7 p.m., but our family of 4 attended with our almost 1 and 3-year-old kids. The oldest one tested out the childcare space upstairs while I delivered my talk, and I brought our baby on stage at the front of the room again in a baby carrier to talk about creating inclusive experiences for parents. It felt unreal that a little over 2 years since we relocated to Canada, I was being asked to speak and advise on, as well as host and create parent-friendly professional development, a byproduct of all of my experiences, negative and positive, since becoming a parent in 2016. Over the summer, I delivered 2 talks at the WordPress WordCamp conference in Ottawa. One was a keynote called Baby in the Boardroom, based on my Inclusive Spaces talk, and the second was a 3-hour workshop I custom developed in order to inspire others to validate their ideas, build an audience, and write a book out loud, based on what I had built over the past 3 years, by starting with my simple travel and flexible work blog. I had great feedback on both of these sessions, and people approached me after who were expecting their first baby, as well as those who wanted to explore more about remote remote and flexible work, and how I had traveled over the years. Any chance I saw to speak to a new audience about including primary caregivers, I took. Then we all know in 2020 what happened when these in-person events were paused. I knew I could continue to help others to adapt to these work and life changes in different countries. I began creating flexible and remote work with kids resources based on my experiences doing fractional consulting as a freelancer before becoming a parent and since having kids. In March 2020, the Women in Leadership Foundation asked me to present a webinar on that exact topic, and shortly afterwards, Treehouse Medical interviewed me about working from home with kids. I wrote an article for a UK magazine about remote work, and from there I continued to write my newsletter, designed a time blocking template, and even decided to register a mixingbabiesandbusiness.com website. I started recording interviews for my podcast to replace in-person events, which I launched with season 1 in November 2020. Within 6 months, I was asked to join the Startup Canada network as a community organizer, then later as an ecosystem support partner, participating in events and government relations roundtables. I did virtual and hybrid speaking engagements on mixing babies and business, how I recorded and produced this DIY podcast from home, and I spoke to audiences ranging from newcomers seeking advice on flexible and remote work, to remote-first organization leaders, to women entrepreneurs, and digital Main Street account advisors tasked with transitioning their brick-and-mortar small business clients to an online presence and operations, all while looking after 2 kids under the age of 4 during the start of the shutdowns, through to them starting preschool and kindergarten and getting pregnant with our 3rd child. I also did fractional marketing communications for a local business, a working pottery studio and shop, throughout the past 4 years leading up to mid-2023, where I also learned how to do wheel throwing and hand building ceramics, a story for another day. As someone who had worked in the arts and creative industries since 2007, I was led back to where I first began as a creative professional. As of September 2023, I paused the podcast as well as other Mixing Babies and Business activities for almost a full year due to an unexpected life change, which I'll go more into in a future bonus episode, as well as my practices as an artist who's a parent. Stay tuned for those. So here we are, September 2024. We're now 6 seasons into this podcast. 3 of them have been sponsored through the Startup Canada Grants program, and I've been recording for over 4 years now, during lunch, nap time, school, and playtime windows, editing and releasing these mini episodes from my home in Canada on the virtual airwaves around the world. I've received seasonal and event sponsorship secured to cover basic operations to produce low to no cost entrepreneurship resources for parents. Representatives from all levels of Canadian government have met and spoken with me as a changemaker focused on creating safe spaces for parents and their families through Startup Gov's programming. And aside from the activism, speaking, and freelance work, I've authored my first book, Startup Blogging, Validate a Business Idea and Build Your Audience, released in April 2020, to help others creating solutions in public. I'm currently writing my second book about my experiences as a parent focused on entrepreneurship, flexible, and remote work with kids. I continue to produce digital resources and presentations for parents who are also leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives, and I've been creating hand-built ceramics and art prints, selling via local gallery boutiques, markets, and privately in Canada. I've continued advocating for creating more inclusive business spaces, programming, and experiences for primary caregivers and their families, and I'd love to support you and cheer you on as you explore opportunities around mixing babies and business in your day-to-day life. Sign up to the waitlist for the Changemaker program at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/changemaker to be notified of when this opens for registration in 2024. And if you're wondering how you can get started on similar activism, advocacy, and activities alongside your kids, then you can listen back to my other solo episodes, number 45, Baby in the Boardroom, Becoming an Accidental Activist and Parentpreneur from 2021, number 54, Remote Work with Kids, my keynote session for the Running Remote Conference from 2022, episode number 61, How I Plan and Host Parent-Friendly Business Events in Corporate Spaces from 2022, episode number 70, Showing Up As You Are, Pitching and Presenting Alongside Your Kids from 2023, and episode number 80, Hosting and Producing this podcast around a toddler and 2 school-age kids from 2023. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or follow and leave a review. It helps other parents around the world find the podcast. Connect with me online and access your parent-friendly, entrepreneurship, flexible, and remote work resources at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com. Thanks for listening.